They gave her $10,000 to disappear. Not 10 million, not even a settlement worthy of humiliation. Just $10,000 and a dead dockyard no one wanted. They laughed when she accepted it. They laughed because the warehouse was rotting. They laughed because the tide had eaten half the pier. They laughed because they thought she was too broken, too quiet, too small to understand what she was signing away. What they didn't know was that she wasn't walking out empty-handed. She was walking out with the one piece of their empire that actually mattered. 3 weeks later, the same family that mocked her in a Manhattan boardroom would be standing in a fortress of glass and stone, watching their billion-dollar merger collapse in front of them. Because the woman they had called a burden was no longer their discarded wife. She was the owner of the room, the owner of the leverage. And before the morning was over, she would become the owner of everything they had left. For 7 years, they mistook Ilara's silence for weakness. They thought her soft voice meant she had no power. They thought her patience meant she had no strategy. They thought the quiet woman sitting beside Damien Voss at dinners, galas, and board events was just a decorative wife who had somehow married above her station. They never asked where she came from. They never asked why powerful men sometimes went strangely quiet when they heard her last name. And they definitely never asked why she wanted an abandoned dockyard more than cash. If they had, they might have discovered the truth before it was too late. But arrogance has a habit of making people blind. And blind people sign away kingdoms every day. The conference room at Voss Aerodyne smelled like espresso, polished oak, and expensive contempt. Outside, Manhattan was drowning in cold rain. Water streaked down the floor-to-ceiling windows in silver lines, blurring the skyline into something distant and unimportant. But inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was almost festive. Damien Voss sat at the head of the table like a man attending a coronation rather than a divorce. He wore a dark charcoal suit that looked custom-built for arrogance. His cufflinks caught the light whenever he moved, and every movement felt practiced, as though he had spent years learning how to look powerful in rooms where he had inherited more respect than he had earned. To Damien's right sat his mother, Vivian Voss. Vivian had the face of a woman who had never accepted a world in which she was not obeyed. Diamonds glittered at her throat and wrists, even though it was barely 10 in the morning. Her hair was immaculate. Her lipstick was sharp. Her eyes, however, were the coldest thing in the room. She had hated Ilara almost instantly, not because Ilara had done anything wrong, because Ilara had entered the Voss family without performing gratitude properly. She had not fawned. She had not begged for approval. She had not turned herself into a hungry little social climber the way Vivian had expected. She had remained polite, distant, unreadable. Vivian could forgive many things, but she never forgave what she could not control. At the far end of the table sat Malcolm Reed, the family attorney. He was the kind of man who wore sympathy like a necktie, decorative, useful, and never real. He had handled Voss family paperwork for 15 years. He knew where the shell companies sat, where the tax shelters breathed, and which signatures had built the family's empire out of ambition, debt, and carefully managed appearances. Across from them sat Ilara, cream cardigan, hair pinned back, hands folded in her lap. If someone had walked in without context, they might have mistaken her for a nervous assistant dragged into the wrong meeting. She looked soft, quiet, modest. Exactly the kind of woman Damien's world had trained itself not to take seriously. That was the first reason they lost. Malcolm slid the stack of divorce papers toward her with elegant precision. To summarize, he said, his voice smooth as old varnish, the prenuptial agreement is binding and comprehensive. Mr. Voss is offering a one-time relocation payment of $10,000 in exchange for full confidentiality, waiver of all claims, and a clean dissolution. Vivian gave a soft laugh into her champagne flute. Generous, she murmured, considering what she brought into this family. Damien smirked. Let's not drag this out, Alara. You had a good run. You lived well. You traveled. You wore jewelry you never could have afforded on your own. It's over now. Sign, and we can all move on like civilized people. Ilara didn't answer. That irritated Damien more than tears would have. He had expected something from her. Anger, desperation, some scene dramatic enough to confirm he had mattered. He wanted proof that he was powerful enough to destroy her. But she only looked down at the papers, calm and still, as though she were reviewing a menu. For 7 years, their marriage had been built on imbalance disguised as sophistication. Damien liked telling people he had rescued her. He loved the story of meeting her in a coffee shop in Brooklyn, where she had supposedly been sketching in a notebook and working on freelance illustration projects. He told the story often, sometimes with a smile, sometimes with mock humility, always as though it proved something flattering about him. What it actually proved was simpler. He liked owning beautiful things he believed had no power of their own. At first, Ilara had played the role well enough. The understated wife, the gentle presence, the woman who listened more than she spoke. She attended dinners without competing. She endured Vivian's backhanded comments with infuriating grace. She sat through business conversations Damien never bothered to simplify for her, assuming she couldn't follow them anyway. When his executives laughed, she smiled faintly. When investors ignored her, she noticed everything. Damien mistook that noticing for passivity. Vivian mistook it for breeding inferiority. And Malcolm, perhaps worst of all, mistook it for irrelevance. That had been their second mistake. The third was thinking that because Ilara rarely defended herself, she didn't know when she was being insulted. She knew. She knew every time Vivian referred to her wardrobe as earnest. Every time Damien interrupted her mid-sentence at dinner. Every time one of his executives looked through her, as though she were upholstered furniture. Every affair hidden under the phrase, late meetings. Every lie polished into respectability. She knew all of it. She just never corrected them. People reveal more when they feel safe underestimating you, and the Voss family had always felt very safe. Damien Voss did not love Ilara. He loved the way she made him feel curated. She was beautiful in an understated way that improved his image without competing with it. She was quiet enough to make him seem larger, elegant enough to be displayed, modest enough to be manageable. He had married her the same way he acquired art, quickly, expensively, and without asking enough questions. In the first year of marriage, Ilara had still believed there might be a man underneath the performance. There were small attempts. She asked him to come see the waterfront at Blackwater Cove one autumn afternoon because the old Dockyard looked beautiful in the fog. He said he was busy. She asked if he wanted to meet her parents when they passed through New York. He postponed 3 times and then forgot. She once found a locked storage container inventory tied to one of the family's old properties and mentioned it casually over dinner. Damien barely looked up from his phone. Later, when she stopped asking, he didn't notice. That was how most of their marriage died, not in a single scandal, but in the slow starvation of attention. Vivian helped where she could. She criticized Alera's clothes because they were too plain, then criticized her when she dressed well because it looked aspirational. She mocked her hobbies, mocked her silence, mocked her background. She called Alera earnest, the way cruel people say harmless. And through all of it, Alera remained composed. That composure became its own kind of insult, because people like Damien and Vivian understood tears. They understood shouting. They understood groveling. Those were languages that reassured them of their superiority. But dignity? Dignity unsettled them. That morning in the boardroom, Alera's calm felt wrong somehow. Damien couldn't explain it, but something in her stillness scratched at his nerves. It was too clean, too controlled. Not the stillness of someone defeated, the stillness of someone measuring distance. Vivian noticed it too. "Is she even listening?" she asked, swirling her champagne. "Or does someone need to translate this into a language she understands?" Alera finally lifted her gaze. Her eyes were dry, clear, unafraid. And for the first time that morning, Damien felt something small and unpleasant turn in his stomach. It was not guilt. Men like Damien rarely feel guilt quickly. It was uncertainty. He pushed it aside at once, because uncertainty only survives if someone feeds it. And Damien Voss had spent his whole life starving any thought that suggested he might not be the smartest person in the room. Then Alera spoke. "I don't want the $10,000. The room went silent. Vivian turned so sharply the crystal at her wrist clinked against her glass. "What?" "I don't want any money," Alera said again, softly but clearly. "I'll sign the divorce. I'll sign the confidentiality agreement. I'll waive all claims. But I want one asset transferred in my name." Damien leaned back, amused now. "One asset," he said. "And what exactly have you decided you can't live without? The Milan apartment? One of the cars? The art?" Alera reached into her canvas tote and drew out a folded property survey. She placed it on the table and smoothed it carefully with both hands. "I want Pier 9, she said. "The abandoned dockyard at Blackwater Cove. The warehouse, the title frontage, and the maintenance easement running beneath the service road." For a moment, no one moved. Then Vivian laughed. It started as a sharp exhale and broke into full, ringing mockery. "The dockyard," she said. "That rusted graveyard by the cove?" Damien actually smiled with relief. "Alera, that property is worthless. Half of it should have been demolished years ago." Malcolm adjusted his glasses and began flipping through the portfolio file. "Legally, it's simple enough," he said. "The paper value is negligible. Environmental liability makes it more burden than benefit. Frankly, it would cost more to restore than it's worth." Vivian leaned back in triumph. "Of course," she said. "Of course she'd choose junk. She always did have a strange attachment to broken things." Alera folded her hands over the survey. "Yes," she said quietly. "I suppose I do." Damien barely skimmed the transfer authorization before signing. Why would he? To him, it was dead land, salt rot, and a warehouse used by no one. Malcolm added the dockyard, the strip, the right-of-way, and the easement language. He marked the relevant pages and rotated the papers toward Alera. She signed each page steadily. No trembling, no hesitation, no performance. When it was done, she removed her wedding ring. Damien had bought it in under 15 minutes between meetings. He remembered feeling pleased with himself for choosing something classic.
Ilara had always thought it looked like an expensive summary rather than a love story. She placed it on top of the final document. "You're free now," she said. Damien gave a short laugh through his nose. "That's it?" "That's it." She stood. As she turned to leave, Vivian stepped directly into her path. "Listen to me carefully," she said, voice low and poisonous. "Do not come crawling back when reality finds you. Do not show up at our door when that diseased little Doc starts draining your life. You are leaving this family with dirt, rust, and pity."
That is exactly your level. Ilara looked down at her. For the briefest second, something cold flashed across her face. Not wounded, not angry, precise. "Goodbye, Vivian," she said. "Enjoy the summit." Then she walked out. Behind her, laughter erupted again. And just like that, the Empire signed away the one artery it could not survive without. Rain hit Ilara's face the second she stepped onto the street. She did not open an umbrella. She walked 2 blocks through the cold Manhattan drizzle, past black cars and mirrored windows, until she reached a quiet curb where a long black sedan waited under a bare-limbed tree. The driver stepped out immediately. He was broad-shouldered, silver-haired, and dressed with the kind of severity money only buys when it comes from somewhere older than fashion. He opened an umbrella over her. "Miss Vale," he said. Ilara reached up, removed the clip from her hair, and let the dark waves fall loose around her shoulders. Then she slipped off the cream cardigan Vivian hated so much and dropped it into a nearby trash can. Beneath it was a black silk blouse, sharp lines, and a version of herself the Voss family had never once imagined. "Never Voss again," she said, "and never misses anything." The driver inclined his head and opened the rear door. Inside, the car glowed with muted amber light. A tablet sat waiting on the seat beside her. On the screen was a detailed infrastructure map of Blackwater Cove, marine boundaries, buried conduit lines, easement overlays, utility corridors, storage inventories. A secure call connected. A man's crisp European voice filled the cabin. "Is it done?" "Yes," Ilara said. "The transfer is complete." "And the corridor?" "Secured. The dock, the frontage, and the maintenance easement are all in my name." There was a pause, then a low, satisfied laugh. "So he never bothered to ask what ran beneath that road?" "He believed the land was worthless." "And the archive?" "Elijah's team is moving Container 7 tonight. Quietly. No media. No traceable paperwork." "Excellent," the voice said. "Then Phase 2 begins." Ilara leaned back against the leather seat and watched Manhattan dissolve behind rain-blurred glass. For 7 years, she had lived as Ilara Quinn Voss, the soft-spoken illustrator, the quiet wife from nowhere, the harmless woman people stopped noticing because they assumed they already understood her. None of that had been accidental. She had met Damien in a coffee shop, yes, but not by fate, by design. At the time, she had been finishing a private research thesis on inheritance behavior among self-made public elites and legacy-rich private capital families, a project she funded herself because official institutions would never have had the courage to name it honestly. She wanted to understand a simple question. Could a man who worshipped status still recognize value in a woman who appeared to have none? Damien Voss had answered that question thoroughly. No. He had loved possessing her. He had loved explaining her. He had loved being seen with her. But loving her? Understanding her?
respecting her outside his own reflection? Never. That truth might have ended in divorce alone, if not for what Elara found during her second year of marriage. It happened by accident. She was organizing archived property files for a charity auction Vivian wanted to host when she came across old survey maps tied to Voss family holdings, legacy parcels nobody in the modern family cared about. Among them was Pier 9 at Blackwater Cove. The file should have been worthless. Instead, buried in the maps and storage manifests, Elara found inconsistencies. Unregistered container inventories, outdated conduit references, maintenance notes that had been struck through but never fully erased, and the name of Damien's late father attached to engineering review entries no one in the current company had ever mentioned. That led her to Container 7, and Container 7 led her to the truth. Damien's father had been working on a private coastal cooling architecture years before the market knew how valuable it would become. There were material designs, thermal models, and fragments of a system that, if properly developed, could dramatically reduce the cost of large-scale ocean-adjacent server infrastructure. Most people would have filed it away. Elara had it reviewed. Quietly. Over 4 years, through shell consultations, independent labs, and family contacts Damien didn't know existed, she learned exactly what Pier 9 was. Not dead land. A strategic gate. By the time Damien started positioning Voss Aerodyne around coastal expansion, Elara already knew the forgotten dockyard connected to the one maintenance corridor his flagship infrastructure would eventually need. And when the marriage finally collapsed, she didn't ask for revenge. She asked for the key. 3 weeks passed.
To Damien Voss, they were glorious. The divorce stayed private, buried beneath brighter headlines. Voss Aerodyne was entering late-stage merger talks with Halcyon Grid, one of Europe's most aggressive energy infrastructure groups. If the deal closed, Damien's valuation would explode. Financial magazines had already started calling him the future of coastal tech. Damien loved the phrase so much, he repeated it until it sounded inherited. Vivian floated through dinners and gallery events, telling people her son was about to become something historic. She asked about Elara once over dinner. Any sign of her? Damien smirked and cut into his sea bass. None. Probably somewhere drowning in rust and unpaid taxes. Vivian smiled. Good. Meanwhile, every invoice for the summit venue Damien had chosen, North Glass House in Iceland, moved exactly where Elara intended. Not to a hospitality trust, not to a management company. To Vale Meridian Holdings. North Glass House sat on a basalt cliff over the Atlantic like a threat turned into architecture. Black stone, sheer glass, white surf crashing below. It was rarely rented and almost never approved for corporate use. Damien wanted it immediately. Perfect, he said when his assistant mentioned it. Remote, imposing, cinematic. Halcyon will eat this up. His assistant warned him that the property's owners were famously selective. Offer double. Approval arrived in under an hour. Damien laughed when he saw the confirmation. See, he told Vivian that night, money opens every door. In London, Elara reviewed the payment trail and corrected him silently. Not money. Leverage. When Damien's plane landed in Iceland, the wind nearly tore his coat from his shoulders. North Glass House rose from the cliffside like something built to intimidate old gods. Even he paused when he first saw it. This, he said, straightening his lapels, is how serious people do business. At the entrance, they were greeted by the house manager, Soren, a tall, unreadable man whose calm looked professionally weaponized. "The Halcyon delegation has arrived," Soren said. "Dinner is at 8. The owner will join the signing in the morning." Vivian adjusted a cashmere glove. "A woman owns this place, yes?" "The owner values discretion." Vivian sniffed. "Of course she does." They were shown to the east wing. The rooms were immaculate. Stone floors, black steel, deep firelight, silence everywhere. Not warm silence, arranged silence. The kind that makes people lower their voices even when they don't know why. Malcolm felt it immediately. Something about the house bothered him. The approvals had come too easily. The legal routing had been too clean. The payment structures had vanished behind private entities faster than normal. He nearly mentioned it to Damien. Then he didn't. Damien never rewarded caution, only certainty. So dinner came, and everyone walked willingly onto the board. Dinner was held in a long chamber overlooking the Atlantic, though overlooking was far too gentle a word. The room seemed suspended above the Black Sea itself. One wall was pure glass, and each wave below looked capable of swallowing the entire structure if it chose. Across from Damien sat Henrik Laurent, chairman of Halcyon Grid, silver-haired, deliberate, famously immune to performance. Beside him sat his daughter Astrid, Halcyon's chief strategy officer, and 2 legal advisors who spoke rarely and noticed everything. Wine was poured, courses arrived. Damien performed. He spoke about scale, disruption, inevitable growth, coastal dominance, market leadership, next-generation infrastructure. He spoke like many powerful men do when they mistake vocabulary for intelligence and confidence for proof. Henrik listened politely. Astrid listened less politely. Halfway through the second course, she checked her tablet and frowned. "That's unusual." Damien smiled. "What is?" "Market movement around Blackwater Cove," she said, "and coastal conduit rights in the Northeast Corridor. Someone has been accumulating adjacent logistics control through layered entities." Damien shrugged. "Speculation." Astrid continued reading. "And industrial marine rights tied to legacy holdings. Strange timing, given tomorrow's agenda." Vivian gave a thin smile. "My son has excellent people handling these matters." Astrid looked up. "I'm sure he does." Henrik set down his glass. "Final due diligence completes in the morning. If anything essential has shifted, we will know." "There's nothing to find," Damien said at once. "All critical access is secure." From the mezzanine above, hidden in shadow, Ilara watched him say it. She stood perfectly still in a midnight suit with an ivory collar and a slim band of old gold on her finger. In her hand was a glass of wine Damien once mocked her for ordering correctly. He looked confident. That was good. Confidence makes collapse cleaner. Before dawn, fog consumed the cliff. By morning, North Glass House looked like it was floating in a blank white void. Ocean gone, horizon gone, world erased. In the obsidian conference room, Damien arrived first, impatient already. Vivian complained about the coffee. Malcolm reviewed documents with growing unease. Henrik and Astrid entered on time, accompanied by counsel and a forensic diligence specialist carrying a second binder thick enough to change lives. Astrid did not sit. She placed both hands on the black stone table and looked directly at Damien. "We have a problem." Damien forced a laugh. "Then let's solve it." Henrik remained standing. The merger cannot proceed as structured. Damien's smile tightened. Why? Astrid opened the binder and turned it toward him. Because your primary Atlantic cooling corridor, the subsurface maintenance route supporting your coastal expansion, and the access rights tied to that corridor are no longer under Voss Aerodyne control. Damien stared. That's impossible. No, Astrid said. It's documented. Malcolm stepped forward, suddenly pale. She rotated the maps. Transfer records, easement revisions, marine frontage rights, access diagrams, highlighted corridors leading from Pier 9 through the service road into the infrastructure Damien needed for the company's future rollout. His face changed slowly. First confusion, then recognition, then fear. Blackwater Cove, Pier 9, the Dockyard. Ilara, he said without meaning to. Astrid's voice remained cool. This morning a gate was installed at the access route. Your crews are locked out. Without that corridor, your launch timeline fails. Without the launch, valuation drops. Dramatically. Vivian looked around in disbelief. Over a dock? Astrid met her eyes. Over control. The room went dead still. Then a woman's voice came from above. Exactly! Everyone turned. At the top of the staircase stood Ilara. But not the Ilara they remembered. The softness was gone. The apologetic silhouette was gone. The modest wife they had spent 7 years reducing with glances and jokes had vanished completely. In her place stood a woman carved from precision, winter light, and old authority. Her ivory suit fit like command. Her posture carried the effortless certainty of someone who had never needed permission to enter powerful rooms. Only a reason. She descended slowly. Each step sounded deliberate. Damien stared at her as though his mind had broken somewhere between memory and reality. Vivienne actually stepped back. Soren moved aside and lowered his head as Ilara passed. Good morning, Ms. Vale. Damien's face emptied. Ilara? He whispered. What are you doing here? She reached the table and took the head seat, the one Damien had assumed belonged to him. The better question, she said, is what are you doing here? Henrik Laurent stood immediately. Ms. Vale. Vivienne looked between them, horrified. You know her? Astrid answered first. Everyone serious does. Damien swallowed hard. Henrik spoke carefully now, respectfully. Ilara Vale, daughter of Adrian Vale. Ilara Vale, she said. Trustee of Vale Meridian, principal of North Glass House, and controlling party, as of this morning, of the Blackwater Conduit Corridor, the marine frontage, and the archival intellectual property housed at Pier 9. Vivienne made a strangled sound. No, that's impossible. She told us she was from Ohio. Ilara turned her gaze toward her. My parents retired in Ohio, she said, after spending decades building institutions your family borrows from. Even Henrik's counsel lowered his eyes at that. Because in the worlds that mattered most, private infrastructure, sovereign financing, legacy banking, the Vale name was not merely respected. It was obeyed. Damien gripped the table so hard his knuckles whitened. You lied to me. Ilara looked at him for a long moment. No, she said. I simply learned that you never ask questions once you believe something belongs to you. Vivienne found her voice again, sharp with panic. This is fraud. You manipulated the settlement.
You tricked us! Ilara folded her hands. I requested an asset. Your attorney approved the language. Your son signed the transfer. You laughed while I accepted it. Which part would you like to classify as trickery? Malcolm said nothing. He could not. Because deep down, he knew the answer was devastatingly simple. They were not deceived. They were careless. Damien stepped forward. Fine, you made your point. Open the gate. Name a number. Ilara's face did not change.
You still think this is about money? It is about money, Damien snapped. Everything is.
For you, she said quietly. Perhaps. She touched the binder Astrid had opened. Pier 9 contains more than a rusted warehouse. Your father used it as a private engineering archive. While you were busy using his surname as a ladder, he was storing thermal lattice designs, saltwater cooling models, and a materials concept capable of changing coastal infrastructure economics. I found them. I had them evaluated. I completed what he began. Damien stared at her. My father kept junk there. No, Ilara said. He kept legacy there. You just never looked because there was no spotlight on it. Henrik slowly sat back down. Now he was listening with genuine interest. Astrid leaned forward. You control the access and the patent position? Yes. And what are you offering? Ilara slid a slim folder across the table. A revised future. Not a merger with Voss Aerodyne. A partnership with me after I acquire the company at corrected value. Damien lunged toward the folder. You can't do that! Ilara did not raise her voice. Sit down. He froze, and in that moment, everyone in the room felt the shift. Damien's force had always been performance, expensive, loud, and inflated by people who benefited from applauding him. Ilara's authority was different. It did not ask to be believed. It simply arranged the room around itself. Henrik opened the folder. Vivian turned desperately toward Damien. Do something! He looked at Ilara. What do you want? Her answer came without hesitation. Accuracy. Ilara stood and began walking slowly around the table. Not dramatically, not angrily, just truthfully. For 7 years, she said, I watched Voss Aerodyne confuse velocity with strength. I watched a company with real potential become a vanity machine for people who mistook excess for excellence. Engineers were underpaid, while executives burned money on jets and image. Structure was mocked. Discipline was ignored. Legacy was inherited and then treated like decoration. She stopped behind Damien's chair. You did with your company what you did with your marriage, she said softly. You assumed possession was understanding. Vivian's face trembled with rage. How dare you speak to us like this in front of outsiders? Ilara turned toward her. Outsiders? Mrs. Voss, I own the house. Silence hit like glass breaking. Then Ilara returned to the head of the table and placed 2 documents side by side. You have 2 options, she said. Option 1. Halcyon walks away. I keep the corridor closed. Your coastal launch fails. Your debt covenants trigger. Your board removes you.
Creditors dismantle what remains. By the end of the month, Voss Aerodyne is a carcass. Damien had gone visibly pale. And option 2? He asked. Ilara slid the second document toward him. You transfer controlling interest immediately to Vale Meridian under emergency acquisition terms. Existing debt is stabilized. Core teams remain.
The corridor reopens. Halcyon signs with me instead of attending your funeral. Damien looked down, then stared. His mouth moved before sound came. At the bottom of the document, in clean, black text, was a personal line item. Executive relocation package, $10,000. Vivian snatched the document, read it, and made a small, broken sound. Damien looked up slowly. Ilera met his eyes. "It's generous," she said. "Take it, Damien. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Astrid turned her face slightly, hiding a smile. Henrik did not bother hiding his. "You're humiliating me," Damien said hoarsely. Ilera's voice stayed calm. "No," she said. "I'm pricing you correctly." Damien tried one final rush of anger. He threatened litigation. He threatened exposure. He threatened scandal. Ilera placed another file in front of him. Inside were internal abuse records, hidden liabilities, expense manipulation, offshore diversions, executive misconduct, and enough evidence to turn any legal fight into a public execution. Damien stopped speaking. Malcolm whispered, "If you don't sign, the board will see all of this by Monday." Henrik closed his folder. "My company does not invest in emotional instability." That was it. The illusion shattered. Damien reached for the pen. His hand shook so badly, he missed the line the first time. Ilera watched in total silence. When he finally signed, the scratching sound of the pen against paper felt louder than every insult they had ever thrown at her. For years, they had weaponized laughter. Now, all they had left was quiet. The descent from North Glass House was not a departure. It was an evacuation. The private cars were gone. The jet access was gone. The luxury had vanished with terrifying speed, as though the world itself had decided Damien Voss no longer qualified for soft landings. By the time he and Vivian reached New York, the headlines had already changed. Merger collapses. Vale Meridian takes control. Voss forced out in emergency deal. At the estate gates in Westchester, security and recovery officers were waiting. The mansion had been collateral. The control loss clause had triggered. The debt had been called.
For one supervised hour, Damien and Vivian walked through the house they had treated like permanent scenery and filled plastic bags with clothes and toiletries, while guards followed at a polite but merciless distance. Vivian tried to take jewelry. It was logged and denied. Damien went to his study. On his desk sat a framed photo from their wedding. Ilera had been smiling. Not politely, not performatively. Really smiling. In the photo, he looked distracted. He stared at it for a long time. Then he set it back down exactly where it had been. Because for the first time in his life, Damien Voss understood something unbearable. He had not lost a good woman. He had failed to see one while he still had her. The next morning, Ilera entered Voss Aerodyne headquarters as owner. By the end of the week, it had a new name, Vale Aerodyne Group, and for the first time in years, the company was being run by someone who actually knew the difference between image and value. 3 months later, Damien lived alone in a cheap apartment above a dry cleaner in Queens. No tailored power, no inherited audience, no empire. Only memory. One rainy afternoon, he went to see Ilera. Her office was full of light, glass, and living things. Not decorative things, growing things. Deliberate things. For one strange second, he understood why she had wanted the Dockyard. It had never been about ruins. It had always been about potential. "I didn't come to beg," he said. "I assumed not," Ilera replied. He looked at her and finally said the only honest thing he had left. "I looked at everything in my life and only valued what impressed other men." A small silence passed between them. Then he said, "I think that made me poor long before I lost money." Ilera studied him carefully. "That's probably true." "Do you hate me?" "No," she said. "Hating you would mean carrying you. I put that down." He lowered his eyes. "What happens now?" Ilera turned toward the window. "You keep going," she said. "Without the company, without the name as armor. If there's a decent man underneath all that performance, you'll have to find him the hard way." He nodded. "Alone?" "Yes." And when he left, Ilera did not feel triumph. She felt completion. 5 years later, Ilera Vale stood on a stage in Geneva before world leaders, investors, and cameras from every major network. Behind her on the screen were 3 words: the Pier 9 Foundation. She smiled and said, "Years ago, I was offered $10,000 to disappear quietly. I framed the check, not as an insult, but as a reminder. Underestimation can be capital, if you know how to use it." Far away, in a warehouse office, Damien watched the speech in silence. He no longer looked powerful. He looked real. And maybe, for the first time in his life, that was worth more. Because Ilera had not won simply because she was richer. She won because she paid attention to the man in front of her, to the legacy in the warehouse, to the corridor beneath the road, to the value hidden inside what everyone else mocked. The Voss family lost everything because they laughed at what they didn't understand. Ilera built a legacy because she looked closer. And that is the difference between people who inherit power and people who know how to use it. If this story hit you hard, tell me this in the comments. If you were Ilera, would you have done the same thing? And if you want more stories about quiet people becoming the loudest force in the room, don't forget to subscribe.